You have done everything you were told to do. You finished school, you found a stable job with a predictable paycheck, you rent or own a modest home in a neighborhood with decent schools, and you drive a reliable car that is neither luxurious nor embarrassing. You are the picture of middle-class stability, the kind of life that your parents' generation held up as the ultimate achievement of hard work and prudence. And yet, something about this picture feels wrong in a way that is difficult to articulate. It is not that you are poor. You can pay your bills and even put a little aside most months, but it is also not that you are comfortable in the way you expected to be. There is a persistent, low-grade financial pressure that seems to come from every direction at once, a sense that simply maintaining your current lifestyle costs more than it should, not in dramatic spikes but in 1,000 small fees, premiums, surcharges, and penalties that somehow never appear in the budget you so carefully plan. You look at people who earn less than you and wonder how they survive, and you look at people who earn more and wonder how they escaped. The confusing truth is that being middle class is not just an income bracket. It is a financial position that comes with its own unique set of hidden costs that are invisible to anyone outside the middle class and barely perceptible even to those inside it. The core concept that explains this paradox is something economists and financial psychologists call the middle-class penalty, the systematic overpayment for essential goods and services that occurs when you have just enough money to disqualify yourself from assistance programs, but not nearly enough money to access the truly efficient markets reserved for the wealthy. Think of it as a financial uncanny valley. A zone where you are too rich for poverty subsidies and too poor for wealth discounts, leaving you to pay the highest effective prices for almost everything that matters. The family living in subsidized housing pays rent that is capped at 30% of their income, while the wealthy family buys a home with a jumbo mortgage at historically low interest rates and watches the property appreciate tax-advantaged over decades. The middle-class family, in between rents at market rates that have outpaced wage growth for years, or buys a modest home with a conventional loan, paying full property taxes, full insurance, and full maintenance costs without any of the tax shelters or capital gains advantages that favor higher net worth households. This is not a matter of complaining, it is a structural reality baked into the way housing, healthcare, education, transportation, and even basic banking are priced in modern economies. The psychological dimension of this penalty is just as important as the financial one because it explains why so many middle-class people feel exhausted rather than grateful. Behavioral economics teaches us that humans are highly sensitive to what are called pain of paying effects, the mental discomfort we experience when we hand over money for something. The wealthy, by definition, have enough margin that the pain of paying for ordinary expenses is muted. They can automate their bills, outsource their financial management, and focus their mental energy elsewhere. The poor, while experiencing far greater financial strain, often qualify for programs that reduce or eliminate certain costs, food assistance, reduced utility rates, free or low-cost healthcare, and legal aid. The middle class, however, feels the full pain of every payment because they are paying full retail price for almost everything, but without the cushion of wealth that makes those payments feel trivial. You feel every dollar of the $400 car repair because it comes out of the same account that has to cover the mortgage, the student loan, the child's dental bill, and the grocery run. And because you are constantly managing these trade-offs, your cognitive bandwidth for planning, investing, or even just resting is constantly depleted. This is not a character flaw. It is a predictable outcome of living in the high-attention, high-friction zone of the income distribution. Let us walk through the math of the middle-class penalty across 4 major spending categories. Not to exaggerate, but to illustrate how small percentage differences compound into significant annual costs. Start with housing. In a typical American metro area, a household earning $60,000 per year might rent a two-bedroom apartment for $1,500 per month or $18,000 annually, which is 30% of their gross income, right at the recommended threshold. A household earning $30,000 would likely qualify for a housing voucher or subsidized unit where their contribution might be as low as $800 per month or $9,600 annually, which is only 32% of their income, but in absolute dollars less than half of what the middle-class household pays. A household earning $150,000 might buy a $350,000 home with a 20% down payment and a 30-year fixed mortgage at 4%, paying roughly $1,800 per month including taxes and insurance, or $2,400 annually, which is only 14% of their gross income. The middle-class household in the rental pays $18,000 per year with no equity building and no tax deduction for mortgage interest. The wealthy household pays slightly more in nominal terms, but a much smaller fraction of their income. Plus, they build equity and enjoy appreciation. The middle-class household pays a higher effective housing cost relative to their means than either group. Now, consider healthcare. The middle-class household earning $60,000 likely buys insurance through an employer, paying premiums, deductibles, co-pays, and out-of-pocket maximums that can easily total $5,000 to $8,000 per year before they receive any significant care. A lower-income household might qualify for Medicaid, which has minimal or zero premiums and very low cost sharing. A higher income household might still have employer insurance, but because their income is higher, the same dollar amount of healthcare spending represents a much smaller percentage of their budget. And they may also have access to health savings accounts with triple tax advantages that the middle-class household cannot fully fund. The middle class gets the worst of both worlds. They pay substantial premiums and out-of-pocket costs, but they do not earn enough to make full use of tax-advantaged health accounts. The same pattern repeats in transportation, where the middle class buys used cars at inflated dealership prices because they cannot afford the luxury of paying cash for a reliable vehicle from a private seller, and they cannot qualify for the deepest financing rates reserved for high-credit, high-income buyers. And in banking, where the middle class pays monthly maintenance fees, ATM fees, overdraft fees, and credit card interest because they keep just enough money in their accounts to avoid the truly predatory fees of the unbanked, but not enough to qualify for the premium accounts that waive all fees. When you add these penalties across a full year, the total is startling but not sensational. A middle-class household earning $60,000 might pay an extra $2,000 per year in housing costs compared to a subsidized renter, an extra $1,500 in healthcare costs compared to a Medicaid recipient, an extra $800 in transportation financing costs compared to a cash buyer, and an extra $500 in banking and credit fees compared to a high-net-worth customer. That is $4,800 per year, or 8% of their gross income. That is effectively a hidden tax for the crime of being neither poor enough for help nor rich enough for efficiency. And unlike a visible tax, this penalty never appears on any government form or wage statement. It just bleeds out of your checking account in the form of slightly higher interest rates, slightly worse insurance terms, and slightly more expensive access to almost every service you need. Now, zoom out from the household budget to the systemic mechanics that create this middle-class penalty. The modern economy is increasingly designed around two distinct markets: a subsidized market for the poor and a discounted market for the rich, with the middle left to pay retail. Subsidized markets include food stamps, Section 8 housing, free school lunches, and Medicaid. programs that are means-tested and often have sharp eligibility cutoffs. Discounted markets for the wealthy include preferred interest rates for high credit scores, waived fees for high account balances, access to private investment vehicles with lower expense ratios, bulk purchasing power through membership clubs, and the ability to pay cash for large purchases to avoid financing costs entirely. The middle class typically earns too much for the subsidized market, but not enough to fully access the discounted market. They may have decent credit but not decent savings, but not enough to qualify for private banking, decent income, but not enough to buy a car in cash. They are perpetually stuck in the retail market, where prices are highest and terms are worst, because retail is designed for one-off, low-loyalty, price-insensitive transactions. The wealthy buy in bulk and negotiate, the poor receive transfers, and the middle class buys one yogurt at a time. Historical parallels help illuminate why this situation feels so frustrating compared to earlier eras. In the post-war decades from the 1950s through the 1970s, the middle class enjoyed something economists call the Great Compression, a period of relatively low income inequality where wages grew in lockstep with productivity, where union membership was high, and where many essential services like healthcare and higher education were either inexpensive or heavily subsidized for a broad swath of the population. The middle class of that era did not face the same penalty because the gap between the subsidized market and the discounted market was much smaller. Public universities were nearly free, employer pensions were common, and health insurance was both cheaper and more comprehensive. Since the 1980s, the gradual dismantling of universal subsidies and their replacement with means-tested programs has created sharp cliffs rather than gentle slopes. A family that earns $1 over the threshold for food stamps loses hundreds of dollars in benefits instantly, but a family that earns $10,000 over the threshold does not gain any of the advantages of wealth, such as access to tax-advantaged investing or preferred credit terms. The result is a middle class that is constantly navigating these cliffs, paying high marginal tax rates on every extra dollar earned when you factor in lost benefits, while never quite reaching the zone where money starts to buy efficiency. This brings us to the identity shift that this understanding demands. The conventional narrative about middle-class financial struggles is almost always framed as a matter of personal behavior. You are told that you need a better budget, a stricter grocery list, a cheaper phone plan, or a side hustle. And those things are not useless, but they miss the structural reality that being middle class is itself expensive. Not because of your choices, but because of how the market is organized. Shifting your identity means letting go of the shame that comes with feeling like you should be doing better than you are. You are not failing at middle-class life. The middle-class life is failing you in subtle, systematic ways that no amount of personal discipline can fully overcome. This is not an excuse to give up. It is a reason to stop blaming yourself for a problem that is not yours alone. The first step toward any meaningful change is seeing the trap for what it is, not as a reflection of your worth, but as a feature of the economic landscape you happen to inhabit. The second step is recognizing that the traditional markers of middle-class success, the nice apartment, the reliable car, the occasional dinner out, the ability to help your kids with a modest expense, are all priced at a premium precisely because they are the markers of middle-class success. Marketers and service providers know that the middle class is the largest demographic with the most consistent spending patterns, and they have optimized their pricing models to extract as much as possible from that demographic while keeping them just comfortable enough to not rebel. The subscription that auto-renews at a higher rate, the warranty you are pressured to buy, the extended service plan, the slightly upgraded trim level, the premium for paying monthly instead of annually. All of these are middle-class traps designed to capture the person who has just enough disposable income to say yes to a small extra charge, but not enough to absorb the cumulative effect of 100 small extra charges. Seeing these traps is not about becoming paranoid. It is about becoming clear-eyed. Every time you are offered an upgrade, a protection plan, a convenience fee, or a subscription, you can pause and ask yourself whether this is a genuine need or a middle-class penalty dressed up as a small luxury. The final and most difficult shift is to redirect your financial energy away from optimizing your spending on middle-class goods and toward building the kind of buffer that allows you to escape the retail market altogether. This does not mean you need to become wealthy, but it does mean that the most valuable financial asset for a middle-class person is not a higher income. It is the ability to avoid paying the middle-class penalty. An emergency fund of 6 months of expenses allows you to buy a used car from a private seller with cash instead of financing through a dealership. A credit score above 760 allows you to qualify for the best interest rates on any loan you do need. A modest investment portfolio, even just a few $1,000s in a low-cost index fund, can serve as collateral for better banking relationships. These are not get-rich-quick strategies. They are slow, patient, boring accumulations of financial stability that gradually move you from the retail market to the discounted market. Every dollar you save in fees, interest, and penalties is a dollar that stays in your pocket and compounds over time. The goal is not to become rich. The goal is to stop paying the hidden fees of staying average. So you sit with this new understanding, not as a set of instructions, but as a lens. You look at your bank statement differently now, noticing not just how much you spent, but how much you overpaid for the privilege of being middle class. You see the monthly maintenance fee on your checking account, the interest charge on a credit card balance you paid off 3 days late, the slightly higher price you paid for groceries because you do not have a membership at the bulk warehouse store, the premium you pay for auto insurance because you cannot afford to pay the annual premium in one lump sum. These are not signs that you are bad with money. They are signs that you are playing a game where the rules are stacked against players at your income level. The quiet, calm, analytical response to this realization is not despair, and it is not frantic hustle. It is a patient commitment to redirecting every possible dollar away from the retail market and toward the assets that will eventually buy you a seat at the discounted table. You may never leave the middle class, and that is fine. But you can stop paying the hidden fees of staying average, one small, conscious choice at a time.